The rain always makes me remember. It's the same drizzle that clings to the windows of my high-rise office in Seattle, the same kind that fell on the day of her funeral. I was 8 when my world ended. Back then, we lived in an old, ivy-covered mansion in Franklin, Pennsylvania, a small town where everyone knew your name and your past. I can still hear the creak of the wooden floors, feel the way sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, and smell the warm cinnamon of my mother's cookies drifting in from the kitchen. My mother, Eleanor Carter, was everything. She had this laugh that wrapped around you like a blanket. Her hands were always busy, folding laundry, brushing my hair, baking, or gently guiding my fingers through the folds of a delicate origami crane. 1,000 paper cranes brings a wish to life, she told me once, guiding my hand through the final fold. I still remember how soft her fingers felt. "Do you believe that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me and smiled. "I believe in wishes that come from the heart, Lucian. The cranes just help us remember them." The paper cranes hung above my bed, strings of them gently swaying every time I opened the window. They were bright blue, green, yellow, all colors she carefully picked out. But the colors in our house began to fade the day she got sick. She started sleeping more. Her laughter came less. Her hands, once so steady, trembled when she tried to fold paper. I remember sitting beside her in the hospital, my small hands resting on hers as she tried to complete just one last crane. "Lucian," she said, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear, "you have to be strong now, okay? Even when it hurts." "I don't want you to go," I whispered, my throat tight. She smiled through her pain and pressed the unfinished crane into my palm. "I'll always be here," she said, touching my chest. "In here." Those were the last words she said to me. The funeral is a blur. I remember black umbrellas, the heavy gray sky, and the sound of dirt hitting the casket. I remember how quiet my father was, James Carter, a man known for commanding boardrooms, reduced to a shadow. Afterward, he threw himself into work. Some said it was his way of coping. Maybe it was, but to me, it felt like he was running. From her. From me. From everything that reminded him of what we'd lost. At night, I would sneak into my mother's old room, wrap myself in the cardigan she used to wear, and unfold the paper cranes one by one, reading the tiny notes she'd hidden inside. Words like asterisk love asterisk, asterisk hope asterisk, asterisk forever asterisk. One night, my father found me sitting on the floor with the cranes scattered around me. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. "Lucian, you should be asleep." "I miss her," I said quietly, not looking up. He walked into the room slowly and sat beside me. His hands looked so large compared to mine. He picked up one of the cranes and stared at it for a moment. "She believed in a lot of things," he murmured. "Do you?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just crushed the crane lightly in his hand and set it down. "You need to grow up now. The world doesn't stop for grief." I stared at the crushed crane, my heart cracking. He left the room without another word. And I realized, in that moment, I'd lost both of them. That was the beginning of a different kind of childhood. One where silence replaced bedtime stories, where hugs disappeared, where the walls that once echoed with laughter now held nothing but shadows. But I held on to those cranes, because they remembered when no one else did. I was 10 the first time I saw Vivian. It was a Sunday, the kind of quiet gray afternoon that made everything feel a little heavier. I had just come home from the library, a place I escaped to more and more those days, arms full of borrowed books and my backpack sagging with notebooks. When I walked through the front door, I froze. There she was, standing in the foyer like she already owned the house. Tall, angular, with sharp features that made her look more like a porcelain sculpture than a person. Her blonde hair was twisted into a knot so tight I thought it might snap. She wore red lipstick, high heels, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Lucian, this is Vivian," my father said, appearing at her side. She's going to be living with us now. Her eyes flicked over me. She smiled again, but it felt clinical, like she was measuring me. "It's lovely to meet you, Lucian," she said sweetly. "I've heard so much about you." I didn't answer. Something in my chest curled tight. I could already feel it. This woman was going to take up space. My mother's space. "And these are Chloe and Elias," my father added, gesturing toward the two kids peeking around Vivian's legs. Chloe was about 12, with the same icy composure as her mother. She had a thin smirk on her face, as if she'd already decided I wasn't worth her time. Elias, maybe a year younger than me, stood with crossed arms and narrowed eyes, like he was daring me to say something. I just nodded and muttered, "Hi." Vivian knelt down slightly, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. "I know it's a big change, darling, but we're going to be a happy family, I promise." Happy family. It was the beginning of the lie. The changes came fast. First, the living room was updated. My mother's favorite armchair vanished. The family photos were replaced with sleek black and white portraits of Vivian and her children. Even the kitchen, once filled with warmth, took on the cold, sterile look of a showroom. Within weeks, it wasn't just the house that felt unfamiliar. It was my father, too. He was suddenly always busy, always distracted. When I tried to talk to him, he seemed preoccupied, like I was interrupting something more important. Vivian, on the other hand, was always present, watching, critiquing, comparing. "Lucian," she said one evening, frowning at my posture at the dinner table, "you should really learn to sit like a gentleman. Chloe always keeps such good form." I straightened, my cheeks burning. "She's not better than me," I muttered. Her smile sharpened. "Oh, darling, I didn't say that." But she didn't have to. She made it clear every day. Chloe and Elias quickly followed her lead. At first it was small things, mocking the way I spoke, hiding my books, calling me names under their breath. But then it escalated. One afternoon, I came home to find my paper cranes torn to pieces, their fragments scattered across my bedroom floor. The strings they hung from had been yanked from the ceiling, leaving ugly holes above my bed. My heart dropped. I bent down, carefully picking up the pieces like they were shattered glass. Elias leaned on my doorframe, grinning. "Oops," he said, tossing one of the heads into the air. "Guess the wind got in." I stood, fists clenched. "Those were from my mom." He shrugged. "She's dead. Get over it." I lunged at him before I could stop myself. He yelped as we tumbled to the floor, and I barely got one punch in before Vivian stormed into the room. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't even look at Elias. Instead, she grabbed my arm and yanked me back. "How dare you attack my son, you little brat?" she hissed. "You think this behavior is acceptable? He destroyed the cranes. I tried to explain, but she slapped me. Open palm. Hard. "You're lucky I don't send you to boarding school," she snapped. When my father came home later, I told him everything. I was shaking, my cheeks still red. He sighed. "Lucian, you have to learn to adjust. Vivian's doing her best." "No, she's not," I said bitterly. "She hates me." "She's not your mother," he said flatly. "And she doesn't have to be." He walked away before I could reply. That night, I sat in my closet with a flashlight, salvaging what I could of the torn paper cranes. I tried to refold one, but the crease was wrong. The paper was too damaged. So I started a new one. I didn't cry. I just folded. Because even if the house no longer felt like home, and my father no longer felt like a father, I could still remember my mother's voice in every fold, every wing. And in those quiet hours, I promised her again, one day, I'll get out of here. I'll build something better. I'll become someone they can't ignore. There comes a point when the hurt doesn't sting anymore. It just settles in like dust. Quiet, permanent, heavy. By the time I turned 13, The house had stopped feeling like a home. It became more like a museum of someone else's life, a cold, curated display designed by Vivian, starring Chloe and Elias as the ideal children, and me as the forgotten footnote. I learned how to live without being seen. I stopped asking my father for attention, stopped trying to explain when Vivian twisted things. I went to school, kept my head down, and buried myself in books. I lived in the library more than anywhere else. Among pages and ink, I could disappear into other people's stories, people who weren't trapped in houses that hated them. My mother's diary became my sanctuary. She had written in it almost every day while she was sick, mostly quiet observations, birds at the window, memories of my first steps, recipes for tea and cookies, but there were little messages for me too. You're stronger than you think, Lucian. Even when it feels like no one sees you, I do. I always will. Some nights, when I couldn't sleep, I'd fold paper cranes from notebook pages and write messages of my own. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed. One day, I'd take them somewhere she would have loved, somewhere far away from Franklin, somewhere I could finally breathe. The bullying from Chloe and Elias never stopped, it just got more refined. Chloe, who now carried herself like royalty, was the queen of passive cruelty. She'd smile sweetly to my father's face, then mock my clothes, my silence, my weird obsession with origami behind his back. Elias, meanwhile, turned more physical. He was bigger than me now, angrier, and always looking for a reason to shove or slap or taunt. Once, he kicked my backpack into a puddle before school. I said nothing. I just picked it up, wiped the mud off, and walked away. But sometimes I fought back, quietly. I remember one evening, I was doing my homework at the kitchen table when Vivian entered, heels clicking against the tile. "You didn't sweep the patio like I asked," she said, arms crossed. "I had homework," I replied without looking up. She snatched the textbook from under my pen and slammed it shut. "You're not above the rules, Lucian. You live in this house, you pull your weight." "I do," I said, standing slowly. "But I'm not your maid." Her face twitched, the mask cracking for a second. She took a step closer. "Careful," she said, her voice low and sweet, like syrup hiding broken glass. "You're lucky your father hasn't sent you away. He listens to me now, Lucian. This is my house. You're just what's left of hers." I didn't flinch. "Not this time." "Maybe," I said, "but you'll never be her." When I was 15, I stopped calling the house home, even in my head. I had nothing but grades and grit. I aced every test, stayed late for extra credit, worked weekends at a bookstore just to stay out of the house. The day I received my acceptance letter to a college in Pittsburgh, I didn't celebrate. I just folded another paper crane and tucked it into my mother's diary. "One step closer, Mom." That night, as I packed in secret, my father passed my room and paused at the door. "You really going through with it?" he asked. He looked tired, not angry, just small. "Yes," I said, not stopping. He stepped in. "You don't have to go so far." I finally turned to face him. "You let her make this house unlivable. You let her erase Mom." He looked away. Vivian was trying to help me. Help us all heal. "She helped herself," I said flatly. "And you let her." He didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to the dresser, picked up a faded photo of my mother holding me as a baby, and stared at it for a long time. "She would have been proud of you," he said softly. "I wasn't. Not always. But she would have been." It wasn't enough, but it was something. The morning I left Franklin, the sun barely rose. I stood at the edge of the driveway, suitcase in one hand, mother's diary in the other. I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. Instead, I whispered a promise to the paper crane I tucked into my jacket pocket. "I'll make something beautiful, even from this." And I walked away. Starting over wasn't as magical as I had imagined. Pittsburgh was loud, crowded, smelled like wet pavement and exhaust. My dorm was tiny, the radiator rattled all night, and my roommate played loud music that made my teeth vibrate. But none of that bothered me. I was away from Franklin, away from her, and that was enough. I had freedom, and silence, and space to exist without judgment. But freedom is a strange thing when you've never had it. I didn't know what to do with it. I spent the first few weeks buried in classes, drifting between lectures and the library like a ghost. I avoided eye contact, skipped the dining hall, ate granola bars at my desk. It was easier than being seen. Then Raj happened. Raj Patel was everything I wasn't: loud, curious, and unapologetically friendly. He was my dorm roommate, and unfortunately for my quiet plans, he had no interest in keeping to himself. "Yo, Lucian," he called on move-in day, waving as I entered the room, dragging my suitcase behind me. "You from around here?" I hesitated. "Not really. Small town. Franklin." Raj laughed. "Never heard of it. But if it's got a Walmart and a gas station, it's probably like my hometown. Anyway, Raj, Palisi, basketball obsessed. Talk too much. You?" "Lucian, business. That's it." He grinned. "No hobbies? Dark secrets? Mysterious past?" I gave a small smile. "None worth telling." He didn't press, just shrugged and went back to hanging a Bob Marley poster on the wall. But something about his energy chipped at my walls. Over time, we became friends, not because I tried, but because Raj never stopped showing up. He dragged me to basketball games, even though I didn't understand the rules. He talked through late-night study sessions, cracking dumb jokes to keep me awake. He'd toss me an extra sandwich when he knew I hadn't eaten. One night, after we got back from a noisy, chaotic house party, he flopped onto his bed and said, "You ever gonna tell me what happened back home?" I stared at the ceiling. "It's complicated. I'm a good listener. It's not something I want to revisit." "Fair," he said quietly, then added, "But you don't have to be stuck in it, either." Then came Sarah. She sat next to me in an economics class, curly brown hair, coffee-stained notebook, and a smile that felt like sunlight. She had a voice that softened every word she said and a habit of doodling flowers in the margins of her notes. "You take detailed notes," she said one day after class, pointing to my outline. I blinked. "I guess. You should share them with me sometime." She smiled. "I'm terrible at staying organized." She didn't treat me like I was fragile. Just normal, equal, and it terrified me. So I kept my distance. I was friendly but guarded. I didn't know how to let people in, not without bracing for pain. The call came in December. My phone buzzed during my shift at the campus coffee shop. It was my father. "Lucian," he said. His voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. "I want you to come home. For Christmas. The family needs you." Family. That word felt like a lie. I stepped into the break room, phone pressed to my ear. "The family that ignored me," I said coldly. "The one that let her treat me like I didn't exist." Silence. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have protected you more. I thought if I kept the peace, everything would work out." "Peace for who?" I asked. Another silence. "I'm busy," I said finally. "I have an exam." I hung up, and then I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall, feeling something hollow and sharp open inside me. Despite it all, I kept going. That semester, I gave a major presentation on urban development. I practiced every night, reciting in the mirror, pretending my mother was in the audience. When I finished the final slide, I imagined her clapping. We won second place in the competition. Later, one of the professors asked me to be a research assistant. "You have vision," he said. "People like that are rare." I didn't say it aloud, but in my head, I whispered, "I'm not who they made me. I'm more than what they took from me." Franklin hadn't changed. The roads still curved like the loops of a noose. The trees still clung to their last dying leaves, and the sky still sagged with that familiar gray. Even the "Welcome to Franklin" sign had the same chipped paint, like time refused to move forward here. I hadn't set foot in that town in over 4 years, but the moment the bus rolled in, I felt 12 again, angry, tired, and homesick for a home that never really existed. Carter Enterprises loomed in the distance like a fortress made of glass and memory. It was my father's empire, once bold, respected, ambitious. Now it felt like an inheritance soaked in ghosts. He called me back himself just after graduation. "I want you to work with me," he'd said. "You have your degree now. Come home. Learn the business." I should have said no. But some part of me, some raw, unfinished part, needed to face what I left behind. When I arrived at the mansion, the first thing I saw was her. Vivian. Still pristine. Still polished. Still fake. She greeted me at the door with a stiff smile and a tilt of her head, like I was a client she had no choice but to tolerate. "Lucian," she said, "you look older." "You look the same," I replied flatly. "Still running the show." Her smile didn't falter. "James asked me to help after all. Someone had to keep things going while you were off. Finding yourself." Elias appeared behind her, taller now, broader, just as smug. "Welcome home," he said. "Hope you don't mind starting small. We've got a lot of filing for you to catch up on." The next few weeks were exactly what I expected. Humiliating. They gave me the title Project Coordinator, but I wasn't coordinating anything. I made copies. I fetched coffee. I was sent on errands for office supplies and stapler refills, while Elias sat in meetings and Vivian smiled at investors. Every time I tried to contribute, I was dismissed. I spent nights reviewing every file I could get my hands on. Blueprints, budgets, client lists. I knew I wasn't there to observe. I was there to reclaim what had been stolen from me. One afternoon, I found my father alone in his office. The lights were dim, and he was holding a framed photo of my mother like it weighed more than the building itself. "She believed in people," he said softly. "That was her flaw, and her strength." "I didn't come back for her memory," I said. "I came to build something. Something better than this." He looked at me then, really looked. "You remind me of her," he said. I wanted to be angry, but I wasn't. Just tired. Then came the meeting. Vivian and Elias had orchestrated a proposal for a luxury resort development. It required demolishing an old neighborhood in downtown Franklin, homes, small businesses, people's lives. They presented it like it was progress. I sat silently through the pitch, flipping through their glossy mock-ups, listening to their buzzwords. "Revenue projections are strong," Elias said confidently. "This could put Carter Enterprises back in the spotlight." Vivian leaned in. "It's a win-win. We buy the land cheap, build high-end condos, attract out-of-state buyers. Franklin becomes desirable." "No," I said. They blinked at me. "No." Elias scoffed. "Do you even understand the proposal?" "I understand what you're trying to do, and I'm telling you, there's another way." I stood up, hands shaking but voice steady. "Renovate the neighborhood. Create mixed-income housing. Support local businesses. Turn that area into a sustainable district. Long-term value, not quick profit." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "That sounds idealistic," she said. "No," I replied. "It sounds like the company my father built before you corrupted it." Elias slammed the binder shut. "You don't get to talk like that. You left. We stayed. We ran the business while you played hero." "I didn't leave. I escaped," I said. "And I came back to fix what's broken." That night, I packed a bag and left again. My father watched me from the porch, silent. "I wanted this to work," I said to him, "but she still runs everything. And you let her." "I'm sorry," he said. But I was done listening to apologies that came too late. I drove through the night, with nothing but the wind and the weight of old promises. Seattle waited, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving toward something, not away. Seattle was gray. Not the kind of gray that haunted Franklin. This was different. Cleaner, calmer, like the city had made peace with the rain. I stepped off the bus carrying nothing but a suitcase, my degree, my mother's diary, and a box of paper cranes I had folded through every chapter of my pain. I had no plan, no job, no connections, just the kind of raw, bitter drive that either shapes a person or destroys them. I rented a room above a laundromat in the University District. It was cramped, the ceiling cracked, and the heater didn't work half the time. But it was mine. No Vivian, no Elias, no shadows I had to tiptoe around. I could finally breathe. The first few weeks were hard. I applied to every real estate firm I could find. Half didn't respond. The other half weren't hiring. The few that called me in for interviews smiled politely when I mentioned sustainable housing and community-based development. One man, a developer in a stiff gray suit, leaned back and actually laughed. "You're young, Lucian. I'll give you that. But this market doesn't care about dreams. It cares about numbers. Return. Yield. Understand." I nodded, shook his hand, and walked out with my jaw clenched. He didn't get it. None of them did. I wasn't here to make luxury condos for wealthy transplants. I wanted to build homes, spaces people could belong to. The kind of space I never had. To pay rent, I worked part-time at a grocery store during the day and delivered food at night. I was exhausted, broke, and sometimes bitter, but I never considered giving up. I couldn't. Not when I remembered my mother's voice reading stories about phoenixes rising from ashes or the messages she'd left behind in her diary. Even if the world tries to erase you, you still get to decide who you become. It was at a community meeting, some random local event I almost skipped, that everything shifted. The topic was abandoned lots in Rainier Valley. One particular space, formerly a hardware store, had sat vacant for nearly a decade. I've walked past that place for years. An older woman stood up and said, "It's just rotting there. Rats and graffiti. The city promised to do something, but it's still nothing." My hand rose before I could stop it. "I have a proposal," I said. "It's just a concept, but I think we can turn that space into a small housing complex and a park. Solar panels, affordable rent, a garden. It's doable, with the right partners." The room fell quiet. Eyes turned toward me. I expected laughter or dismissal. Instead, someone asked, "You an architect?" "No," I said, "but I understand development. I understand structure. And I care more about this community than people who just want to flip a property." Afterward, a woman named Denise handed me her card. "I run a nonprofit," she said. "We've been waiting for someone like you." It started small. A grant proposal. A long chain of emails. Meetings in cold rooms with bad coffee and skeptical city officials. But the idea stuck. I partnered with 2 local nonprofits and a green building co-op. We called the project The Nest, a nod to the cranes, to beginnings, to creating something fragile but safe. I worked day and night, planning, drawing, pitching. I stood before rooms full of men with suits and budgets, talking about dreams like they were blueprints. Some rolled their eyes, but some listened. The Nest took 2 years. 2 years of setbacks, inspections, fights over funding, changes in zoning. 2 years of doubt. 2 years of climbing uphill in the rain. But I kept going, because every time I wanted to quit, I'd look at the paper crane I kept in my wallet, the one I folded the night I left Franklin, and I'd remember what this was about. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rebirth. On the day the Nest opened, I stood in the community park at the center of it all. Children ran through the grass. Families carried boxes into their new homes. A woman played music from her balcony. Life filled the air. I sat on a bench near the garden and unfolded the last crane in my box. I read the note I had written inside it 5 years earlier. One day, I'll build something good. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove me right. I placed it under a small tree in the center of the garden. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was becoming. The call came on a foggy Tuesday morning. I was reviewing a tenant application when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Then something, a twist in my chest, a thread from the past, made me answer. Is this Lucian Carter? Yes. This is Elaine Thompson. I'm with Thompson and Morris Funeral Home. I'm sorry to inform you that your father, James Carter, passed away last night. I didn't speak, didn't move. The silence on the line thickened. I understand this may be difficult. The funeral is scheduled for Friday. You are listed as next of kin. I hung up without another word, and just sat there, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. 3 days later, I was back in Franklin. The moment I stepped off the train, the air wrapped around me like a ghost I couldn't shake. Nothing had changed. Not the streets, not the people, not the cold that settled beneath your skin and stayed there. The funeral was held at a private estate chapel. Of course it was. Polished wood, white flowers, expensive casket. My father would have hated all of it. I walked in late, hoping to blend into the back row. But heads turned. Whispers stirred. He came. That's Lucian. After all these years, I didn't respond, didn't meet anyone's eyes. And then I saw them. Vivian, dressed in black silk, her hair still curled to perfection, like grief hadn't dared touch her. Chloe, standing beside her with blood-red lipstick and a pearl necklace too heavy for the occasion. And Elias, taller now, broader, his jaw clenched like stone. They stood together like a wall, polished, unified, hollow. I kept my distance, until I couldn't. After the service, I moved toward the casket. I didn't expect warmth. I didn't expect peace. I just wanted to say goodbye, to say something I should have said years ago. But Vivian stepped in front of me. Her gloved hand pressed lightly against my chest. You've made your appearance, she said, her voice low. But don't mistake this for an invitation. I looked down at her hand, then back up. I'm not here for you, I said. I'm here for him. She smiled coldly. You don't belong here, Lucian. This was never your family. Get out of my way. You don't want to make a scene. Not in front of the board. Not in front of the lawyer. She leaned in. The will is clear. Everything goes to us. He left you nothing. I stared at her, not with anger, not even surprise. Just exhaustion. I don't care about the money, I said. I came to say goodbye. She scoffed. Spare us the performance. You're just here because you think you're owed something. Chloe and Elias flanked her like loyal shadows. Elias sneered. Chloe rolled her eyes. You never cared, she said. He built everything while you ran away. I stepped past them, ignoring the throb in my chest. My fingers brushed the polished edge of the casket. His face was thinner than I remembered. Peaceful, but distant, like he'd already been gone for a long time. I'm sorry, I whispered, that I wasn't here, that you didn't stop them, that we never fixed anything. I closed my eyes, and I remembered him, not as the man in this box, but the father who once taught me how to skip stones, who used to bring me toy cars and tuck me into bed when I had nightmares. I stayed there longer than I meant to. When I turned around, they were all watching, and I realized I didn't care. That night, I stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of town. I couldn't sleep in the mansion. Not with Vivian and her children in those same walls that once held my mother's laughter. I opened my suitcase, intending to change, and found an envelope. No return address, just my name, written in my father's hand. Inside was a folded letter, and a notarized will. My hands trembled as I opened it. Lucian, I'm sorry for everything. I let them silence you. I let them silence me. I thought I was protecting the family by keeping the peace. But I failed you. I failed your mother. I hope this makes some of it right. Everything. The company, the house, the assets. They're yours. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter pressed to my chest, my breath caught between a sob and a scream. My father had tried. Too late, but he had tried. And now, the real battle was about to begin. Morning came like a slap. The motel room was silent, but my mind wasn't. My father's letter sat on the table, beside the notarized will. His words still echoed, each one heavier than the last. I hope this makes some of it right. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to crumble. But the part that mattered, the part that had clawed its way out of that house years ago, wanted justice. And justice had a name. Harold Ross. Ross had been my father's lawyer since before I was born. He was a fixture in Carter Enterprises, sharp, steady, incorruptible. If anyone could validate this will, it was him. I found his office tucked into a quiet corner of downtown Franklin. It wasn't flashy, just a modest brick building with a bronze nameplate and dust on the windows. Inside, it smelled of paper, coffee, and time. The receptionist barely looked up when I walked in. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but tell him Lucian Carter is here. It's urgent." She paused, studied me, then picked up the phone. "Mr. Ross, someone's here. He says it's urgent." Seconds later, the door creaked open. Harold Ross stood in the doorway, tall, lean, with silver hair combed back and eyes that cut straight through you. "Lucian," he said, "you look just like your mother." I wasn't expecting that. "I need to speak with you," I said, privately. He stepped aside. "Come in." Stacks of files lined every surface of his office. Decades of deals, wills, and lawsuits lived here. The weight of Carter history was in every folder. I handed him the envelope. He pulled out the will first, I scanning the signature, the seal, the date. Then he unfolded the letter. As he read, I saw the color drain slightly from his face. When he finished, he sat back in his chair, quiet for a long moment. "This changes everything," he said. "So it's valid." "Not only valid. This is the most recent notarized document in James Carter's legal record. If this is real, and I believe it is, then what Vivian presented to the probate court is fraud." I leaned forward, voice low. "She's trying to sell off parts of the company. She's cutting out employees. She said I wasn't in the will." Mr. Ross nodded slowly, then stood and crossed to a locked cabinet. He removed a thick file labeled Carter, Jamie's, estate. Inside was a copy of the other will, the one Vivian had submitted. "She filed this last week, dated 2 months before your father died. It's missing key elements, your father's handwriting, his usual phrasing. I was never consulted. That's suspicious by itself. So what now?" Ross fixed his eyes on me. Now we stop her. You're the legal heir. If this goes to court, Vivian loses everything, and possibly faces charges." I exhaled, shaky. "I don't want revenge." "Good, because what you need isn't revenge, it's resolution. Your father may have failed you while alive, but this is his attempt to make it right." I stood to leave. "Lucian," Ross said as I reached the door. I turned. "Don't underestimate her. Vivian will fight dirty. She always has." I nodded. "So will I." That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the motel floor, rehearsing the conversation over and over. I kept hearing Vivian's voice at the funeral. "You were never part of this family." But I had my father's words now, in ink, in law, in blood. I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for truth. For my mother's memory. For my own damn name. By dawn, Ross had set up a meeting with the estate attorney handling the probate process, a man named Mr. Thompson, neutral and meticulous. Vivian would be there. It was time to confront her. Not as a broken boy, but as the rightful heir to Carter Enterprises. I had no illusions about how this would go. Vivian didn't lose. She never had. When I arrived at Mr. Thompson's office, the air inside was cold and sterile. The conference table, polished wood, was flanked by stiff chairs that felt too much like a courtroom. Everything in this place was designed for business, not humanity. But that wasn't why I was here. This wasn't about a family reunion or about healing old wounds. This was about taking back what was mine. I sat down across from Mr. Thompson. He was a tall, older man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, his fingers already tapping on a legal pad. Ross stood beside me, silent, waiting. His calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm building in my chest. Then the door opened. Vivian entered first, followed by Chloe and Elias, their expressions set like masks. The minute she saw me, I saw her eyes flash with something. Frustration. Fear. Maybe both. "Lucian," she said, her voice silky, false, like a snake coiling in the grass. "I didn't expect you to show up." How predictable. She didn't acknowledge the others in the room. It was like she was trying to make me small again, to force me into the role of the neglected child who wasn't supposed to be here. "Get on with it," I said, my voice low but firm. "Let's see the fake will." Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Everyone, please, let's maintain some order here." Vivian smirked, her eyes never leaving mine. "You're wasting your time, Lucian. You've been gone for years. I've run Carter Enterprises just fine without you. Your father's wishes are clear. His assets go to us." I didn't flinch. "That's not what the will says," I said, sliding the notarized document toward Mr. Thompson. "You're trying to sell everything off, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Chloe scoffed. "Oh, really? And what are you going to do, walk in here, wave a piece of paper around, and think that's enough?" "Actually," I said, "it's more than enough." Ross stepped forward, voice steady but stern. "Mr. Thompson, if you would, I'd like to make it clear that this document is the most recent, legally binding will from Mr. James Carter. The document Vivian presented is not only unsigned by Mr. Ross, but it also fails to meet basic legal standards, including the lack of proper witnesses." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Vivian didn't speak. She simply stared at the documents, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, as if the air had grown thick with tension, she finally spoke. "You think you can just walk in here, Lucian, and undo everything I've worked for?" Her voice was quiet, but the venom was unmistakable. "You think your little sob story about being the forgotten child will get you what you want? Your father didn't want you, Lucian. He never wanted you." Her words hit like a slap. They were meant to sting, to make me small, to remind me of everything I'd left behind. But I wasn't that child anymore. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No. What you've worked for is built on lies, Vivian. Your empire is built on the ashes of what was never yours. You've manipulated him. You've manipulated all of us. But that stops today." Her face twisted into a mask of hatred. "You think this is about me? About my empire?" She laughed bitterly. "You still don't get it, do you? This is about power. This is about keeping the legacy alive. I'm the one who kept this family together." "Together?" I asked, a smile tugging at my lips. "No, you tore it apart. You tore me apart." Vivian's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. "I'd advise you to step back, Vivian," Ross said, his voice calm but unwavering. "If this continues, you risk not just losing the estate, but facing legal consequences for the fraudulent will. The evidence is here." Vivian's expression faltered, but she quickly masked it with her usual arrogance. "I'll fight this," she said, her voice thick with defiance. "I'll expose you for the liar you are." "You can try," I said, standing slowly. "But you can't run from the truth. Not anymore." The meeting ended in silence. Mr. Thompson confirmed that Vivian's will would be invalidated, and that Carter Enterprises would be returned to its rightful owner. The legal battle was far from over, but the first blow had been struck. Vivian's plans were already unraveling. As I walked out of the office, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The fight wasn't over, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my father's legacy and my own life. That night, I stood in front of the old mansion, the place that had once been my prison. I'd never planned on coming back to this house. Never thought I'd set foot inside again, let alone own it. But I wasn't a child anymore. This house didn't define me, and neither did Vivian. I would rebuild. I would reshape this place into something that reflected who I'd become. It wouldn't be a house full of secrets and pain. It would be a home. The morning after the confrontation, I stood in the same office I'd once walked through as a boy, but now it was different. I wasn't the overlooked son. I wasn't the outsider. I was in charge. I had inherited it all. Carter Enterprises, the house, the legacy, and the weight of that inheritance felt heavier than I ever imagined. But there was no time to wallow in uncertainty. I had decisions to make. I had a company to fix. Lucian, Ross's voice cut through the quiet of my thoughts. He'd been a steady presence since the will had been revealed. Now he was standing in front of me, a file in his hand. There are things you need to consider. I looked up from the plans spread across my desk. The office was now mine, the corner room with the expansive view of Franklin's skyline, which was, in its own way, still hauntingly familiar. Outside, the gray sky matched the gray of my thoughts. "What's this?" I asked, gesturing toward the file. "It's the Carter Enterprises portfolio. Project proposals, the assets, the liabilities." He laid it out in front of me. "But more importantly, it's Vivian's legacy. We need to make it clear that the direction she was taking isn't the future you want for this company." I nodded, my fingers tracing the edges of the documents. She was going to destroy it. Too many luxury projects. Too many bad investments. I've already seen the financials. Ross leaned forward. "Exactly. But the worst part, she tried to sell the land, the old neighborhood by the river, the one your father wanted to preserve." I froze. The river project had been a long-running dream of my father's, one that I thought had been long forgotten. It was supposed to be something meaningful, something that would outlast Carter Enterprises. It was his vision. Vivian thought she could wipe it clean, start fresh, but she didn't understand the soul of this company. I said, a tightness in my chest. "I'm not here to chase luxury resorts or make quick profits. I want to build something that matters." Ross smiled, his stern face softening just a fraction. "That's the right mindset. You're doing this for the long term. Carter Enterprises can be better than it ever was." The first thing I did was visit the old neighborhood by the river. The moment I stepped out of the car, I could hear the familiar sound of children laughing, the clink of metal from the small hardware shop nearby, and the hum of a community that was still alive despite everything Vivian had planned. I stood on the porch of the old house, which had been empty for years, the one my father had hoped to preserve. I felt my mother's presence here more than anywhere else in the world. She'd loved this place, the idea of homes that weren't just for the wealthy, but for everyone. It was her dream, too. I took a deep breath and pulled out the plans I'd sketched out the night before. They weren't just about building houses or developing properties. They were about rebuilding a community, about giving people a chance to grow and thrive, not just survive. "Lucian," a voice broke through my thoughts. I turned, and there she was, Sarah, standing in front of me, looking as radiant and grounded as ever. I hadn't seen her in weeks, but her smile reminded me of everything I'd fought for. "Hey," I said, feeling a warmth rush through me that I hadn't expected. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said, crossing her arms and looking out over the neighborhood. "I thought you were heading out of town." "I was," I said, "but then I couldn't leave." "Not yet." She raised an eyebrow. "Not until you fix everything." I smiled, a little sheepish, something like that. "I get it," she said, her voice soft. "I know how hard this must be for you. But, Lucian, your father had dreams for this place. And now, you're the one who gets to make them happen. You're in control. It's your legacy to define." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was easy to feel like an imposter in this role, easy to believe that I was just stepping into someone else's life. But Sarah's faith in me reminded me of the truth. This was mine. And now I had the chance to shape it into something my father and my mother would be proud of. I looked at her. "You really think I can do this?" She smiled, her eyes lighting up. "I think you've been doing it all along, Lucian. You're just finally ready to see it." By the time the afternoon sun had dipped low in the sky, I had made my decision. The old neighborhood would be saved. But not just saved, revitalized. I reached out to local nonprofits, architects, and community leaders. Together, we would transform it into an affordable housing project with space for community parks, small businesses, and educational programs. It was going to be more than what my father had imagined. It was going to be a place of hope, of opportunity, and it would be the first step in Carter Enterprises reclaiming its soul. I returned to the office later that evening. The plan was already in motion, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders with every call I made, every decision I set in motion. Ross was in his usual position in front of my desk, going through more files. "I've been in this business long enough to see how much you're willing to fight for," he said, looking up at me. "Don't forget, Lucian, it's not just about what you build, but how you build it." I nodded, setting the phone down. "I know, and I won't forget." That night, as I sat at my desk in the quiet office, I thought about the family I'd lost, the family I'd been given, and the family I was going to rebuild. I thought about my mother's laughter, my father's struggle, and how, despite everything, I was finally free. The Carter legacy was mine now. But it wasn't just about carrying the name forward. It was about making sure that the foundation beneath it would stand strong for everyone.